Welcome back to another episode of Sidelined. A bit of a different episode today because there's not really much Collingwood injury news to talk about, which is good. But like we said from the first episode, if there were sort of bigger injuries in the AFL world, we were going to talk about them. And unfortunately, there are big injuries in the AFL world. But before we get into that, Ethan, how you going, mate?
Pretty good. Good to be back.
Good to have you. Good to have you at Baseline, finally open. So the links will be down below. Ethan looks after my shoulder, which is absolutely cooked at the moment, but he's helping, which is
That's
good,
amazing.
and helps the old neck muscles from looking down at my phone for 24 hours, 7 days a week. All right, so we're going to talk about the ACL injuries and the sort of epidemic that's going through the AFL, just in general. Like it always sort of happens. But we're going to be talking about Jagger Smith, Andy Moniz-Wakefield, but we'll just call him Andy because I don't know if I pronounced his name right. Dom Sheed as well. I know what you're going to say, but Dom Sheed as well. We'll touch on McStay. We'll touch on Harvey Harrison. Let's just get straight into it. Eth, ACL. Let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What is it? Let's just go from there.
So the ACL, the dreaded ACL, I might say, because this is an injury that all players, staff, commentators, fans, everybody dreads those three letters.
Yeah.
And rightly so, because, pretty much everybody who has some knowledge of footy knows that an ACL is basically a season-ending injury, or for some people before they've, even started, unfortunately. So the ACL is a ligament, so it connects two bones together, your thigh bone and your shin bone.
Okay.
Essentially, its job is to stop the shin bone from moving forwards from the thigh bone. So it can... Basically, you can injure it in many different ways. Usually it's going to be a non-contact sort of injury. But if there's a twisting between the thigh bone and the shin bone, that puts sort of like a pressure on that ACL structure. Also, external forces like a tackle can overstretch it and rupture it, basically. Essentially it's a ligament. It connects to the front of your shin bone, and it's there to keep the knee stable, essentially.
The ACL, keeping the knee stable, I thought the ACL was actually in the knee.
It is.
It is?
It is. It's actually quite deep in the knee as well.
Okay,
so
right.
It's actually pretty hard to sort of poke it and like see if it's sore and whatnot, because it is quite deep. We'd term it a intracapsular ligament, so it's literally inside the joint.
Okay.
So yes, it is inside the knee, which is why, it's hard to assess and diagnose at the time, which we did see with Jagger. They originally came out saying, it's just a knock and they weren't too concerned. And then it ended up, unfortunately, being a ACL injury.
And that's something which is a really good segue into it. So when Jagger Smith did his ACL, he walked off the ground, looked fine. He was doing some run-throughs as well. So let's just say, obviously they didn't know what was going on with it at the time. What do those run-throughs, would it put more damage, or it's already done? Like what does that sort of mean for the recovery?
I think the ACL is very difficult to assess at the time, because it swells up inside the knee almost immediately. And like I said, you can't really sort of feel it. You can assess it and test the movement, but you can't like poke it and say, is that sore, basically. So doing run-throughs is a way of testing the stability and integrity of the knee. And look, if you've got pretty good like quad and hammy control, you can probably get around it and make it look like there's almost nothing wrong. I mean, there's been plenty of cases where players have played through like a final or something with no ACL. There's MMA players who fight with no ACL. There's soccer players as well. So you can sort of make it look like you don't have an injury, despite the the long recovery and whatnot associated with it, because your although its job is to stabilize the knee, your quads and your hammies can do a pretty good job of stabilizing the knee by themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, doing the run throughs is a way of sort of testing it, and obviously on a surface level, it didn't look like that much was wrong with
bad.
it.
Yeah.
There is some hands-on testing you can do where you try and pull the shin away from the thigh bone and see how far it moves. Jesus. The more movement, the worse the injury.
Yeah.
Again, they would have done that for sure, but it's not always an accurate representation of sort of what's going on.
Until you get under like an MRI or something, right? Or
MRI is the gold standard.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the only way to really know whether it's ruptured or not. And there's varying grades as well. So, of course, it doesn't have to be completely ruptured. It can be, you can have a slight sprain of the ACL as well. Yeah.
So with Jagger Smith, they came out, the Blues came out and said that it was his ACL. But with Andy from Melbourne, the other young kid, it was an ACL, a PCL, and an MCL. Obviously, those three sound worse than just an ACL.
Yeah.
Both horrendous injuries. Different recovery times?
Overall, the total recovery time is probably going to be similar because the ACL takes the longest to heal and for that graft to sort of set in properly. So, whether it's the ACL alone or with the other ligaments, the healing time's essentially the same, but he's likely to have more ongoing issues going forwards because of the damage to the other structures.
Right.
The surgery is going to be more complicated. The rehab is going to be more difficult because whilst the ACL might tolerate some things, the MCL or the PCL might not tolerate those movements.
Okay.
So it's a more complicated process. But in terms of the healing time, I'd say it's similar. But definitely more complicated. And more likely to have ongoing sort of issues there. And it does happen. It's actually called the terrible triad, where you do ACL, MCL, and medial meniscus is the third one, which I assume he probably did if he's done PCL as well. But it is common for sort of all three to go. And that's why they can look so different as well. Like we saw Jagger doing like run-throughs afterwards. Whereas, the Melbourne guy, he was like on the ground, needed the trainers to walk him off. It was a bad one.
Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. And we saw last year, so this kind of happened to McStay, different sort of injuries, but in 2023, in the prelim, he did his MCL and then came back for training, did his ACL. Harvey Harrison did his ACL. Mason Cox did his MCL last season and came back. What is, for a standard ACL, I know recovery times can change because we've seen numerous players. Doherty came back, Tyson Goldsack came back, and even McStay came back. I think it was 9 to 10 months. What is I know everyone's different, but what is the sort of standard time? Will Carlton fans see their number 3 pick back this season, or they're going to, because he's so young, just give him the whole season, rest him out, and come back next year?
I highly doubt that they'll see him play this season. The nature of the graft means that you need a minimum of basically 9 months for the graft to fully heal and set in and sort of take to the knee. So essentially what they do, there is 2 different surgeries, but I'm 90% sure he's going to get the sort of standard surgery, which is what they call an autograft. Basically, they take a bit of your hammy tendon or your patella tendon, and they essentially stitch that back into the knee where the ACL usually lives. And so you can imagine if you've just grabbed some fresh tissue, it's going to be pretty weak and it's going to lack integrity in the first, few weeks. And then over time, as your body accepts that new tissue, it'll slowly, I think the term's ligamentize, and basically it'll get stronger and sort of anchor itself in there. So you need a minimum of around 9 months for that to actually take. No matter how good your rehab is, you can't speed it up. There's no way around it, unfortunately. They might push to, you know, to sort of 10, 11, 12 months. But yeah, you're looking at a minimum of, I'd say, 9 months.
9 months.
And the research shows that returning players to sport before that puts them at a higher risk of re-injury, which you definitely don't want.
And is that something, because I've heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
when one player, let's just say, does his right knee, so his right ACL, they graft it, whatever they do, he comes back.
Yeah.
He's actually, or she, is more prone to do the opposite
Mm-hmm.
knee instead, because that's more stable, will be a little bit more stable than it is on the other side. Is that a falsity, or is that?
I'm not sure of the exact statistic there, but you're definitely more likely to have a recurrent ACL injury.
Yeah.
Whether that be on the same one or the opposite side, you're definitely, I think, like up to a third of players re-injure the ACL on the same side.
Yeah.
And it's funny you said he or she, because females are way more likely.
In the AFLW, I remember, I think it might have been even the start of last season, they were doing them, like, I reckon there was a new case every 4 days or something.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of research now going into it because of the rise of female sport.
For sure.
There's a lot of research going into why is it different, but they seem to be more prone to doing it as well.
They are, 100%. Generally, the female athlete is a little more flexible or mobile through their joints.
Yeah.
So you can imagine if the joint has more wiggle room, let's call it, it's going to be more susceptible to sprain because it's less stable.
Yeah.
Also, the shape of their hip and thigh is a bit different, and so there's a greater angle between the hip and the knee, which also contributes to increasing that sort of risk of ligament injury as well. So yeah, it's way more common. I don't know the statistics, but it's like, it's way more in the AFLW.
Talking about recovery, now you said minimum 9 months. So Harvey Harrison did his ACL in, I think it was like August, so leading towards the end of the season in finals, and again, very innocuous.
Yeah.
So he would have been, so that's August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So 6 months in now, it looks like at training, he's like hitting, it looks like 100% speed and a little bit of turning and stuff. But I was talking to the physio that's treating him at the moment, and he said, look, you probably still won't see him until July, August. So even though there's some, he's hitting top speed, there's still a lot behind the scenes that sort of goes into it. 100%.
Like return to training is one thing, and return to, cutting, changing direction, jumping, etc. But return to play and return to performance, so playing at that top level, is a totally different ball game. And there's also the mental aspect as well. Like you can imagine you've just had this big injury and you've done all this rehab. You've invested a lot of time and effort and energy into nursing and helping it as much as you can. There's that mental barrier as well, which holds a lot of players back, and getting yourself right in that aspect is towards the end phases as well, is just as difficult as a physical aspect
100%.
as well.
You touched on it off camera.
Yeah. Do
you want to talk about Christian Petrarca doing his ACL?
Yeah. So he actually did his ACL before playing his first ever season. I think that was 2015.
Yep.
And obviously, like we've seen now, he's an absolute gun.
Elite.
And he's unstoppable on the field, and he's obviously recovered really well from that injury, and it doesn't seem to have caused him any ongoing issues. He's quite like a stocky, sort of stronger player, so that probably does or did sort of help him there. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not always the case. Often, like I said, athletes are likely to re-injure the ACL, and particularly younger athletes. I think the stats like 50% tend to re-injure the ACL throughout their
career, the whole career, not just when they come back.
No, throughout the whole career. So you are definitely at increased risk, but some players sort of flourish, I suppose, and sometimes having an extra season of strength and conditioning and training without playing can be beneficial, I suppose, like we saw with Petrarca.
So looking at it sort of, look, glass half empty is that 2 young kids, it's just devastating that they've done such a. It's not even like a torn pec, or it's not nothing that they can sort of potentially work towards. But being with glass half full, being such young kids, and they do get to see inside of the football world from a different perspective now. So what does that sort of mean to them going forward? Like, look, I know we sort of talked about at least, they'll definitely be back next season. There's not going to be anything
for sure.
But for Carlton fans and Melbourne fans wanting to see their players, what does that mean for the longevity of their almost their career, or even just next season with getting this under the belt so early on in their career as well?
For sure. I think it's definitely sad and it's tough mentally on the players, but you got to remember as well, this is like their first season playing footy, so they're going to give this recovery and rehab like 110% because they've just worked their whole sort of childhoods leading up to this this season, and so they're going to give it their all. And like I mentioned, it does actually give them an opportunity to continue to develop their bodies because compared to like the older guys playing, these young guys still, they look small and they look young compared to the others. So that actually gives them a good opportunity to put on some size, to just get familiar with what it's like to play for not play, but to be in an AFL club, to get their routines and their habits all down pat. And hopefully we'll see them, come back really strong next year and smash it next year. But an AFL season is actually catabolic in nature, meaning you're breaking down your body throughout the season. And so he's got that opportunity to I guess create an anabolic season where he's putting on and gaining muscle and strength rather than slowly sort of losing it throughout the season. And also at this age, this is like prime time for putting on muscle. Once you're into your mid-20s, it's a lot harder to actually put on size. But like an 18-year-old is primed to put on on muscle and strength as well. So.
And I don't know if you can answer this, but are there certain people that are more susceptible to ACL? Is it a genetic thing? Could they have just a weak ACL, or is it just you twist wrong, you get hit wrong, and then?
That's a good question, and there's lots of debate over the risk factors. Like, we touched on like male and female. That's a clear. That's a clear risk factor. But people will argue all sorts of things like hammy strength, quad strength, the type of boots you wear. There is actually a bit of research around the actual surface that they play on. So
and look, before you go into it, fans, not even just Collingwood fans, anyone that's sort of watching this, they always say, Dan McStay did his ACL at Vic Park, and Vic Park is just literally a dog park. So it's soft underfoot. It's nice to have a kick on, but it's just a park almost, right? And people say the AIA Centre, it's too hard, and you always hear this. There's always a conspiracy. Icon Park even sort of gets it. So you're saying that it actually could be.
There is some research behind it. It's not definitive, but there's a bit of a correlation between ACL injuries and warmer environments. So if you imagine the turf is a bit more compact, there's not as much give in it. So in those warmer climates, or if it's pre-season where it's been warmer throughout in the lead up to these practice games, having less give in the ground means that the players have more traction essentially under their boot, and so that force isn't absorbed by the ground much at all, and so you're more likely. There's some research that shows you're more likely to do an ACL on a firmer, more compact ground. But it is also just luck of the draw. Unfortunately, sometimes.
And we've seen that where players they go through their whole career without any injuries, and there's just one innocuous twist, and then she's all over, unfortunately.
100%. You can just move in the wrong way or get tackled in the wrong direction. And no matter how strong you are, no matter your body makeup, all other factors aside, you're going to do your ACL in that position at that moment, regardless of all the other factors. So there is, unfortunately, a bit of bad luck involved as well.
100%. And look, we'll wrap it up here. But I guess the biggest takeout that I want sort of everyone, especially Carlton and Melbourne fans, if they're sort of watching, is it is a horrible injury, but there are some silver linings to them being so young, two being right at the start of a season. It's 100%. Not like they, did it halfway through and they're going to miss finals and then they're, not going to come back and it's a push to get to finals next year.
Definitely.
So they do have another 12 months at least under their belt and they'll come back stronger. And I think the thing about it as well, and I said this on Instagram, is they'll come back more hungry. And the hungrier you are in a football club, the more opportunities you're going to get. And, it sucks to see Andy and Jagger do these injuries, but, oh, mate, watch out next year because they are going to be hungry.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Done. Etho, thanks, boss.
No worries. Thank you.
We'll see you in the next one. Hopefully not, but we'll see you in the next one.
See you then.